I was blamed when the mistake happened, even though I'd warned them it would. I worked as a project coordinator for a tech startup. My job involved managing timelines, keeping teams aligned, and making sure projects stayed on track. It required attention to detail and the ability to spot potential problems before they became actual disasters. We were working on a major product launch scheduled for the end of the quarter. The client was a big name, and landing them had been a huge win for the company. Everyone was excited, but also feeling the pressure to deliver perfectly. About 6 weeks before the launch, I noticed an issue during a routine check of the development timeline. The engineering team had fallen behind schedule. Not drastically, but enough that meeting the deadline would require either cutting corners or adding resources. I brought it up in our weekly status meeting. My manager, David, dismissed my concerns. He said the engineering team always caught up eventually and that I was being overly cautious. He didn't want to alarm the client or request additional budget. Just let them work, he said. They're professionals. I didn't feel right about it, so I sent a follow-up email documenting my concerns. I outlined the specific risks. If we stayed on the current path, we'd either miss the deadline or deliver a product that hadn't been properly tested. I suggested we either extend the timeline or bring in contract developers to help. David replied with a brief message saying he'd taken my feedback under advisement, but that we were proceeding as planned. 3 weeks later, it was clear we weren't going to make it. The engineering team was working 16-hour days and still struggling. Features were being pushed out half-finished. Quality assurance was being rushed. Everything I'd warned about was happening in real time. I raised the issue again, this time directly with David and the CEO in a meeting. I showed them the timeline projections and explained that we needed to make a decision, delay the launch, or be honest with the client about reduced scope. The CEO looked stressed and asked David why this was the first he was hearing about timeline problems. That's when David threw me under the bus. He said I was supposed to be managing the project timeline and should have flagged issues earlier. He claimed this was a failure of project coordination, not a development problem. He made it sound like I'd been asleep at the wheel while everything fell apart around me. I was shocked. I pulled up my email from 3 weeks prior, the one where I'd explicitly warned about these exact problems. I showed it to the CEO and pointed out David's response. For a moment, I thought the truth would matter. The CEO glanced at it briefly, then said we needed to focus on solutions, not blame. But the damage was done. David had framed the narrative, and I was now the project coordinator who'd let things slip. The fact that I'd warned them and been ignored became irrelevant in the face of the crisis. We ended up delaying the launch by 2 weeks and working insane hours to get the product ready. The client was frustrated but ultimately accepted the revised timeline. The launch eventually happened and went reasonably well, all things considered. But internally, the story became that I'd failed to properly manage the project. David never corrected the record. In performance reviews and team discussions, the product launch was cited as an example of coordination breakdown. My name was attached to that failure. I felt angry and helpless. I'd done exactly what I was supposed to do: identified risks, communicated them clearly, and suggested solutions. I'd been ignored, and then when the predicted disaster occurred, I was blamed for not preventing it. I started documenting everything obsessively.